Why we're surrounded by
Welcome back. It is day 26 of our 90-day New Testament reading plan with New Life Youth. My name is Christian. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are reading through John chapter 10 through John chapter 12. So I hope you read that already today. But chapter 10 starts by taking us through this interaction with Jesus and the Pharisees again, talking about the shepherd and the flock. Now, the concept of the shepherd, it symbolized a royal caretaker of God's people. God was called the shepherd of Israel. And there was this great responsibility on the leaders of God's people of Israel. But they often had just failed. We see that throughout the Old Testament. And there were just too many of what we would consider to be false shepherds. So God promises that he is going to provide the true shepherd, the Messiah, to care for the sheep. We actually see that in Ezekiel 34, verse 23. Now, Jesus, he's dealing with the Pharisees in this section of John, and he is saying that once again, the people are being led by false shepherds. The Pharisees are the false shepherds. Instead of being a shepherd, they are more like robbers and thieves. Many have even gained their way into leadership through corruption, through manipulation, not by the hand of God, like it should have been. And so Jesus is presenting himself as the true shepherd, as the Messiah, as was foretold in Ezekiel. The Messiah, again, showing up in John. John is showing us this side of Jesus, that Jesus is from heaven, that he is God. And we start to see more of these I am statements from Jesus. He says, I am the gate. Meaning there is only one way to salvation, and it's through Jesus Christ. There are some people who believe that there are many ways to salvation, that there are a lot of options or opportunities for salvation, but Jesus is saying it is only through him. He is the only way into salvation. Jesus then, what he does is he presents himself with the I am statement of, I am the good shepherd. Other shepherds may risk danger for their sheep to protect them, but ultimately when push comes to shove, they'll probably run away if they need to save their lives. Jesus is willing to lay his life down, and Jesus makes it clear that no one could actually take his life from him, that he is actually going to be laying his life down for his sheep, for humanity, for those who accept, right? And so this idea of the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep, it's an important one for us to wrap our heads around, as Jesus is the good shepherd and we as believers are his sheep. And there's a really great teaching by Marty Solomon. I'm going to throw it in the link below. Take some time, listen to it. When I listened to it, I was just blown away, and the understanding. There's so much depth there. So make sure to check it out in the link below. I'll have that there for you. But looking ahead to this story of the death of Lazarus, there are so many details here to talk through, and we're not going to get to all of them, but just I'm going to highlight some real quickly. So through this story, we see Jesus' love for these people as individuals, for Lazarus, for Mary, for Martha. We see that people who love Jesus still get sick and die. Just because we're followers of Jesus, we're not above sickness. We're not above death. We see Jesus is acting according to the Father's timeline. We see the loyalty of some of his disciples here, namely from Thomas, who was willing to die in Jerusalem on their return. Something to note here is that Thomas was also called Didymus, which in the Greek means twin. And so apparently Thomas had a lot of similar features to Jesus and looked a lot like Jesus physically. So for Thomas, this was actually a special risk, going back to Jerusalem, knowing that the Pharisees and these temple leaders were looking to arrest and kill them, because he could have been mistaken for Jesus. So he's at special risk there. Martha, through this story, she shows this faith even in the midst of disappointment, even in the midst of Lazarus dying. She shows incredible faith in Jesus. Jesus comes and he comforts Martha. He comforts Mary. We see this empathetic side of Jesus. He shows this empathy. He's moved by grief. Jesus weeps silently. That word for wept there, it indicates tears shed, not necessarily wailing, but there are all of these lessons and things and these things that we're seeing from Jesus, attributes that we can directly connect to him still, about empathy and seeing our tears and sorrow and grief and how he comforts us. All these different attributes and lessons from this one small section of scripture. But the most important lesson I want to bring today was for all these individuals that were there, and what should stick with us now is Jesus in this story. He displays his power over death and the grave. He is displaying power over the death and the grave. And even this is alluding to, I mean, he's talked about it so much to this point, but the resurrection of Lazarus, I'm having a struggle saying that word today, Lazarus, it's alluding to or a foreshadowing of his death and resurrection in a sense too. There are parallels there. Now, the raising of Lazarus from the dead after 4 days would have been significant as well for Jews. And so there's kind of some thought processes here for the Jews where there was this superstition for them that the soul would have stayed near the grave for 3 days, hoping to return to the body. That was kind of a superstition they had. So like after 4 days, it was accepted that there was no hope for resuscitation, that they would come back. And so now Jesus bringing Lazarus back from the dead shows us and those who were present there that Jesus had full authority over death and the grave. Even before his own death and resurrection, he had authority over death and the grave. This is a moment too, is just one of the last straws before Jesus heads into the final weeks or final week before his death and resurrection. And the question is like, who could really, after seeing this, who can deny Jesus's power now? How could anyone really deny that he was the Messiah? Who can deny that he is from heaven, that he is the Messiah? And we see through the story, it says that many believe. There are many who believe in him. But those with authority are afraid to lose their position of power. They refuse to believe. They refuse actually not even just to believe, but we get this idea that they're refusing to submit to his authority as Messiah just because they love their position, they love their power, they love themselves too much, and they love the praise of people so much. And we see that as we come to chapter 12, as we close out chapter 12, we see even after all of these signs, after all of this teaching, this proclaiming of Jesus as the Messiah, as the Christ, many believed, it says, but still many refused to believe. And John writes the words of the prophet Isaiah saying that he has blinded their eyes and deadened their hearts, or some versions will say hardened their hearts. And we sometimes take this as the idea that God forced this on them. That he forced their hearts to be hard. He forced their eyes to be closed or blinded. And this is less of a forcing. He is not forcing it on them. They had every opportunity to buy into Jesus as the Messiah. They saw the signs. They had all the signs. And so they had the opportunities to buy into the fact that Jesus is the Messiah. But they chose over and over to deny the Christ. And so what happens is God gives them up for their own desires. He's giving them into their own desires. We see that, I think, in Romans chapter 1, it talks about how God gave them over to the desires of their heart, their sinful ways, over to immorality. And here is another case where God is just saying, okay, if that is how badly you want it, here you go. If that's what your heart desires so much, I'm going to let you have that. And now you are going to be spiritually blind. You are going to be hard of heart. And so it's not that God is forcing that on them. He is strengthening what is already there. The things that they've already done, he is strengthening what they've decided. And so they've already refused. And so God will give us, that is something that we have to understand, is God will give us over to the desires of our sin. Like if our sin is desire, Oh my gosh, if our desire is sin, that is what he is going to give us over to, if we desire that more than him. And so these people denied God over and over and over. And so God is just giving them into their sin. He's blinding them to what they have already denied. And it says that there were still some who believed, but they could not be forthright enough to come forth and say that Jesus is the Messiah, or that they believe. And these other Jewish authorities, they just loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. And we could say that they gave into the fear of man instead of giving into the fear of God, or surrendering to the fear of God. And I think we'll end today's video with this idea is, will we give into the fear of man, or will we give into the fear of God? Do we love the praise of man so much that even though we believe in God, we will avoid fully submitting to his authority? What rules our lives? Is it the fear of God or the fear of man? Which one is going to rule my life? The way we live our lives will speak to what we are giving into. The fear of God is this understanding that there's a deep reverence for God. A fear of God is this incredible awe for him. So because of the reverence, because of the awe for him, we choose to submit and live the way that he's calling us to live. We understand his power, his greatness, and maybe not fully understand, but we are living in such awe and reverence for him. The Pharisees weren't living in awe of God. They weren't living in fear of God. They were living in fear of man. And for their own selfish desires, they sought man's praise. They were seeking an earthly reward and not an eternal reward. And so for us, for my life, does it speak the fear of man, or does my life speak the fear of God? And I think that's something for us to think about today as we walk away from today's reading. But as always, why don't you just let us know? Let us know what you're learning as you read today. Let us know here on YouTube, in the comments on the YouVersion Bible Plan, and we hope to see you tomorrow.